Okay, good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us here for our AI Collaborative Salon event. The topic we're going to address today is a very critical, very highly relevant topic on the impact of AI on the global economy, particularly with regard to the labor markets and issues surrounding labor markets. I'm Bill Deckelman. I'm Chief Legal Officer of Andersen Group, Inc., and co-founder of the AI Collaborative, along with my fellow co-founder, Scott Campbell, who is president of the Howard Baker Forum, who is co-hosting today's event with me. The AI Collaborative is a global resource platform and collaborative of business, government, academic, and other leaders, sponsored by the Howard Baker Forum in Washington, D.C., and it's established as with the Chatham House as its research partner. The purpose of the collaborative is to foster a global fact-based dialogue about artificial intelligence and the extraordinary impact it's having. We know it's going to continue to have on business, markets, governments, geopolitics, and enterprise risk and opportunities generally. We're very fortunate in the collaborative to be guided by a remarkable advisory board composed of leaders from industry, academia, and government who bring a diversity of expertise and perspective to our work. I also want to thank our sponsors whose support helps make these discussions possible. And those sponsors are MUFG Investor Services, Andersen, Baker Donaldson, Willis Towers Watson, and Beasley. To learn more about the collaborative and to view past salon events and other related information, I encourage you to visit our website, which is at theaicollab.org. During today's event, feel free to submit any questions you may have through the chat feature on the call, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can near the end of the hour. We have a very impressive panel of experts with us today to address our topic, and very honored to have Fabio Natalucci, CEO of Andersen Institute for Finance and Economics, as our moderator. So Fabio, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks first of all for inviting me. We have two great panelists. Rebecca Diamond, she's a professor of economics at Harvard University, and she's also a member of the Andersen Institute Advisory Board. And Nathan Sheets, who's currently Global Chief Economist at Citigroup, previously Director of International Finance at the Federal Reserve Board, as well as Undersecretary of Treasury for International Affairs. So we have two presentations. Rebecca and Nathan will spend about 10-15 minutes presenting, and then I have a bunch of questions I'll ask them, and then I'll give it back to you, Bill, for questions from the audience. So Rebecca, with that, go ahead.
Great. Just get my slides up here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know, at least so far, about how AI is impacting the labor market. Next slide, please. So there's a pretty strong dichotomy in the current discussion about whether AI is going to put us all out of work or maybe not so much. But it's likely to reshape the labor market, like many other, at least as big as many other prior large technological changes we've seen in the past. So you can talk to, the biggest names at the core of developing AI, and there's a strong view that AI could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs and spike unemployment in the next 1 to 5 years. That was a prediction by Dario about a year ago. So we're already in that window as of now. But another way to think about, or who to ask in terms of what we think the labor market is, how the labor market is responding to AI, is to actually ask the C-suite individuals of many firms across the world, right? They're the ones that need to adopt it and adjust. So they might have an inside scoop and very high quality access to what's actually going on. So one of my prior colleagues at Stanford, Nick Bloom, and many of his co-authors put together this nationwide survey to actually ask C-suite individuals what's going on with AI in their firm. And they're seeing across 90% of the firms surveyed in the US, UK, Germany, and Australia, there's basically been no effect of AI on employment thus far. And this survey was done as of the end of 2025 and even partially into the beginning of 2026. So who's right? Let's go to the next slide. There's sort of three categories where you might think AI, different ways AI could shift the labor market. And the one that's been potentially focused on the most is this idea of complete automation. So take any occupation. Any occupation is actually made up of a bundle of tasks, right? Most of us don't just do one thing, that exact thing all day, every day. We do a bundle of things together that collectively produce output. And this complete automation category would be AI can automate every task at your job. Your job is fully taken on by AI and just there's no role of the human at all in any of those tasks anymore. In that extreme situation, you'd expect a pretty clear prediction. Wages for that job go down because AI can do it cheaper, and employment goes way down because we're just going to use capital instead of labor. This is the doom and gloom scenario that many people worry about, but that's sort of the most extreme complete automation. I think way before we get there, we're going to get into a more partial automation or augmentation world. So going back to this idea that any occupation is a bundle of tasks, some of those tasks may be performed by AI now, and the worker can now outsource some of the work they used to do, and that leaves some residual tasks for the worker to continue doing that AI doesn't do. And potentially, that could either raise or lower wages or employment. I'll go into detail about which of those will occur. But this is a much more sort of, I think, at least in the short to medium run, plausible scenario where we're going to partially automate some people's jobs. Some people, maybe a small set will go to complete automation, but many people's jobs will become partially automated. And whether that's good or bad for their earnings and employment depends on which tasks get automated. And potentially the one that's least known and least talked about, but maybe the most influential, is the new work that's going to be created. So it's much easier for people to think about what they're currently doing and what they're currently spending their time on at work and questioning whether AI can do their current jobs. It's a much easier sort of chain of logical events to think through. It's much harder to think about the job that doesn't exist right now, that no one's doing. But once AI starts to automate some of the tasks that humans have spent many hours on, this will open up new opportunities and new jobs and new tasks for workers to take on. And in that case, we unambiguously have an increase in wages, an increase in employment, because they're now jobs that were not worth doing that potentially now are very productive. And this new work creation is not a trivial margin. If you look at the list of occupations that exist right now, or as of, let's say, the 2020 census, more than 80% of those occupations, or at least more than 80% of the current employment is in occupations that didn't exist in 1940. So we're always creating new work and occupations are always changing. On the flip side, if you actually look at the list of occupations in 1940, less than about 2% of those are completely gone today. So there's much more an expansion of new work over time. Occupations surely decline and shrink and wages can go down, but creation of new work is sort of a truism of our economy as far back as you can see with every technological change. All right, next slide. So let's think about what are the firms telling us about what's actually happening on the ground right now. Next slide. So this large set of co-authors collaborating with central banks and many local economists in each one of these countries worked really hard to survey C-suite individuals of large companies to really get a sense of how AI is being used. And very consistently across the US, UK, Germany, and Australia, you see pretty broad AI take-up. About 70% of firms say they use AI today in some shape or form, and they all predict, or all these countries see a growth in take-up of AI. So they see within 3 years, we expect this to be up to 75%. And in the US, we're at the highest level where this could be up to 84%. So AI is definitely permeating most all firms, and people expect this to increase into the future. Next slide. What are firms actually doing with AI? Maybe not surprisingly, the initial rollout was very much a chatbot text generation service, and that's the largest use you see. Firms using this to create text for writing, for advertising, for many different things. A close second is to use, AI for data processing, machine learning, data science, to actually, analyze firm data and think about how that data processing can be used in many aspects of firm output. A number of firms are also using visual content. So this is like image creation or movie creation with AI. And then a smaller share are using it for robotics or autonomous vehicles. So there's many different uses, text generation being the largest. But one thing to note is actually when you ask, at least for C-suite workers, how much do they actually use it? They say they spend about an hour and a half on AI, using AI per week. So that's not that much. So when you think of take up is quite broad, but it's at this point right now quite shallow. You're not seeing everyone all day using AI in every aspect of their work. Next slide, please. And then you can also ask these firms how they see AI impacting productivity. So far, the average firm is reporting about a 0% productivity gain that they attribute to AI. So it hasn't really, as of the end of 2025, early 2026, had a measurable impact on productivity at the firm. However, most firms are predicting over the next few years this to grow a bit. So maybe an extra, on average, 1.4% productivity gain, which is a non-trivial amount when you think about sort of real productivity growth. We've had a productivity slowdown over the past couple decades, and this is a non-trivial boost to whatever productivity might have been otherwise. Next slide. Thinking about employment, firms, to be fair, are quite heterogeneous in whether they think employment will grow or shrink. So there's a good amount of variation here, but on average, they're seeing executives at the firm expect a modest employment decline of like 0.7%. So this is still pretty small. This is not everybody out of work. AI has automated all these jobs. Interestingly, if you actually ask the employees at these same firms, what do they expect about the role of AI in employment? They actually are forecasting a modest increase of about 0.5%. So maybe both of these are rounding error around 0, but it doesn't seem like neither the workers nor the executives are seeing mass layoffs coming as they adopt AI over the next few years. Next slide. Okay, so that was a very brief, just a few facts about what's going on with firms in AI right now. Then I want to just spend a few minutes to think about a framework of what types of jobs might be shrinking, which types of jobs might be growing, and wage changes as AI enters the labor market. Okay, so next slide. So when you think about what a given occupation pays, it's not only about how much we value the task being done. So compare a crossing guard that helps our children cross the street on their way to work to make sure they don't get run over by cars, to an air traffic controller that makes sure our airplanes don't crash into each other and keeps all the people on the airplane safe. I think we surely care a lot about our children's safety, just as much as we do about airplane riders' safety, but we pay the air traffic controller about 4 times as much. This is about expertise. Like, what do you need to know to be able to do this job? So most people have the skills to be a decent crossing guard, so we don't need to pay them as much to make sure that they can get the children across the street. But an air traffic controller needs substantial training. They need a lot of knowledge and complex tasks and abilities to be able to deal with all the different systems to keep airplanes safe. And this is why we pay them so much more. It's about the relative scarcity of expertise needed. Next slide. And you can think about, for any given occupation, there's a distribution of tasks that make up that occupation. Some of those tasks requiring more expertise than others. So I'm a professor of economics. I teach undergraduates and graduates economics classes. I also work on research that I try to publish and producing knowledge. Part of my job as an economics professor is I'm going to grade some assignments and I'm going to put them into the grade book. Probably that's one of the tasks. That's one of my lowest expertise skills, but it's still part of my job. Whereas research idea generation might be one of my highest expertise skills that makes me able to do impactful research. But there's a wide range between an expertise across what I do. And you can think about AI coming in and automating some of these jobs, some of these tasks. So maybe an occupation could have 25% of its tasks automated, you want to ask yourself, does the occupation lose the most expert tasks to AI or the least expert tasks? So here, I've been painted in yellow, the most expert tasks getting automated. So here, this makes those workers surely more productive because they can get more done with the AI. But then the average amount of expertise you need to do this occupation has actually fallen. You don't need the skills to do the most complex expertise tasks anymore, and you could hire a worker that was lower skill and less knowledgeable to complete the new version of this occupation. This is likely to make employment grow because there's more people in the labor market available to do this type of work, and likely you'll either have a flat or a decline in wages because we don't need as much skill to get this job done. This kind of, think of commoditizing this occupation. And I should have mentioned at the front of this is building from David Otter's work, who's done a lot of work about thinking about how AI is going to reshape the labor market. So these are his ideas. Next slide. But then you can compare that to another occupation, which maybe has the same tasks automated, but maybe in that occupation, those are the lowest skill tasks, the tasks that require the least amount of expertise. And then the remaining tasks done by the human are even more high skilled than they used to be. In that type of occupation, sort of you upgraded the amount of expertise needed. Those workers are now more productive. Average expertise needed for that occupation rises. And likely we'd see wages increase because now we have to pay someone to have we really care only about the most high skill expertise. And those are going to be even scarcer workers to find that are really, really good at those residual high expertise jobs. Here, we'd likely see employment fall because we have fewer workers that can do that job. Next slide. And I can't get in all the sort of econometric and statistical details, but if you look in the past, with the rollout of basically computers and the internet and how that reshaped the labor market, you can actually measure, using data from the census and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, how the set of tasks change over time within each occupation and which types of tasks exit and which types of tasks remain, and thinking about the relative expertise of the occupations of today versus that same occupation back in 1980, and measuring for each occupation that change in expertise from 1980 to 2018, you can then correlate that with how the wages in that occupation changed and also how the total employment in that occupation changed. And indeed, we find that the occupations that upgraded their expertise due to the advent of computers and the internet had an increase in average wages because those are relatively higher skill occupations than they used to be, requiring more expertise. And those occupations also saw a decline in employment because there are fewer workers with the needed expertise to be able to do this sort of upgraded occupation. So you very much see in prior technological change, automation of the same task can have very different impacts on different occupations, depending on whether that task is the most expert task versus the least expert task across different types of workers. Next slide. So I see humans staying in the loop for the near future. We're going to see very large changes across occupations and reshuffling. Certain things are going to get automated, certain tasks are going to get automated, and then huge employment shifts could occur across occupations. But I think it's very unlikely to see large-scale aggregate job loss in the near term. And whether you think about how to think about whether your job is going to grow or shrink, you might want to think about how AI potentially commoditizes expert work in your role or whether it upgrades the expertise that you have. And the creation of new work is also going to expand unemployment, which is often harder to forecast because we don't really know what that new work is going to be yet. Thanks very much.
Nathan?
All right. Well, very good. Congrats to Rebecca on an excellent presentation. And I'll cover some of the same topics, but from more of an explicitly macroeconomic perspective. And if we could go ahead and bring up the slides, that'd be great. And let's go to the next slide. I think the key issue ultimately from a macroeconomic perspective is how much productivity growth will AI bring And when will we start to see that acceleration in productivity? And what I show you here in this left panel is a long history of productivity. And I should note that as a macroeconomist, I'd argue that productivity growth is about as close a thing as we have to a free lunch. That during a period of productivity expansion, we're able to make more output with the same inputs, to make higher quality outputs with the same inputs, or to make the outputs more rapidly. And all of those results lead to more GDP, higher wages, and better macroeconomic performance. Historically, I think a key takeaway is productivity has been quite variable. Coming out of World War II, the economy boomed, productivity grew rapidly as technological gains that were accrued during the war and during the Depression were integrated into the economy. We then went through a period of 20 years where productivity growth was a lot lower during the oil shocks and Paul Volcker's rapid rate hike cycle to get the inflation out of the economy. But notably, during the mid-1990s and for about a decade, we enjoyed a period of much, much faster productivity growth on the back of the internet revolution. Then continuing this theme of volatility coming out of the GFC, productivity fell sharply again and has since rebounded. And I think that that weakness post-GFC was that coming out of the financial crisis, there were a lot of headwinds that were still in play for the economy. Specifically, demand for investment was weak. Banks were hesitant about lending. There was a lot of deleveraging going on. It was a pretty cautious economic environment. And you really need investment. A lot of technological gains tend to be embedded in investment. Investment was weak. And the normalization that we've seen subsequently back to that 75, 80-year average, I would think of as a dissipation of some of the headwinds and a normalization of some of these underlying drivers of productivity. That said, I very much agree, looking at this chart, with Rebecca's characterization that we haven't yet seen the real signature of AI in productivity growth. Recent readings have been a bit stronger than I would have expected, so maybe it's in the early stages. But if so, there's still a lot more to come. Now, kind of putting all of my cards on the table, my thesis, and I'll flesh this out, is that there is a upsurge in productivity growth that we're likely to see during coming years. It's going to be at least as strong as what we saw during the internet period. So I think that's in the pipeline. However, we're not there yet. And I think what's happening is that we're in a process of building out the networks of investment, and I'll talk a fair amount about that, of expertise, of applications, and getting the adoption to happen inside of the firms. In the productivity literature, this is referred to as the productivity J curve. And we're still on kind of that flatter part of the J. And then over time, and I would, again, putting my cards on the table, it feels to me like, over the next several years, 2, 3, 4 years, we're going to start seeing these significant productivity gains. But at the moment, AI is affecting the economy in significant ways, but mainly through the massive investment that's occurring. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So let me sketch out a little bit of the investment story. In some work we've done, we've drawn on data from the national income accounts, the GDP data, to piece together a measure of AI investment. And we account for hardware investment, software investment, investment in grid and transmission of energy, as well as production of power and data center construction. Let's go to the next slide. When we add all those data together, we end up with this series in the left panel. And you see, I mean, the big takeaway is it's just moving up very, very rapidly. So last year, AI investment, by our reckoning, was running around $300 billion, so roughly 1% of GDP. During the first quarter of this year, we saw a further meaningful upsurge, and some of the new agentic tools have hit the market in a big way and are stimulating absolutely massive investments. So in Q1, we're at 436 billion. And there are estimates in the industry that suggest the number for the year as a whole could be as high as $600 or $700 billion. So essentially from 1% of GDP last year to 2% of GDP this year. Looking even further ahead, one of my favorite references is Citi's AI equity strategist. So the person who spends a lot of time thinking specifically about the AI sector is estimating that AI investment in the United States is likely to come in at $4.4 trillion over the next 5 years. So roughly a $900 billion run rate. So the takeaway here is investment is growing very rapidly. We're at high levels at the moment, and it's likely to continue for quite some time to come. The upper right panel just highlights that when you look at investments contribution to GDP, that is now by and large coming from AI investment. And that's another measure of the vigor with which firms are investing in it. And I think it's even fair to say that we're probably seeing some crowding out, so that in the absence of AI, firms would have invested in certain goods. So with AI there, they're saying, well, that's of secondary importance at the moment. We're going to divert our resources and focus them on AI. Another way to parameterize all of this is the US economy last year grew at a little more than 2%. Our estimate is that AI contributed somewhere between 0.5 and 0.75 percentage point to growth. So somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of US growth last year can be directly linked to AI. One final comment here. It's been argued, including by Kevin Warsh, who's the new Fed chairman, that because of AI, we're going to have lower inflation and he's going to be able to cut policy rates. And I think as we see the productivity effects of AI eventually playing through in the economy, that could very well be disinflationary. But at the moment, we're not seeing lower inflation because of AI. And in this lower right panel, if anything, we're starting to see maybe a little bit of inflationary pressure due to AI, due to the massive investment that's occurring. And specifically, the capital goods import prices over the last year or so have started to lip up. And I would very much interpret that as reflecting the very significant demand for AI-related products. So at the moment, it's certainly not disinflationary, and on the margin, maybe leaning more toward inflationary. Let's go to the next slide. This touches, and I'll be brief here, on some of the issues that Rebecca was getting at. And that is regarding just how much adoption of AI is there at the moment, and what is that looking like? And I think that a helpful reference is in the academic literature. It's been proposed that you start seeing productivity gains, so increases in output per worker. You start seeing those productivity gains when the adoption of a new technology is somewhere around 50%. But where it gets a little tricky is on this area of broad versus deep. And I think this survey, this was a Citi survey that we did at the end of last year, adds flesh to that idea. So when you ask U.S. corporates, this was 200 U.S. corporates, when you ask them, are you investing in AI? Everybody says yes. But then when you ask for more information, a small share of them are saying they're still in early testing. The vast majority are in piloting. That means they've got some ideas that they're experimenting with or scaling, where they think they've got some good ideas and they're investing heavily in the new technology. And notably, that's the period in which you get the big macro investments, is when firms are more and more scaling. But notably, only about 5% say they're fully scaled. So when I look at this, it doesn't feel like you kind of think about the broad versus the deep. Of the possible jobs, tasks that can be automated with AI, it feels to me like we're not at a 50% point yet, but we're moving there very quickly. One other take on this is on the right panel. What we did is we compare AI investment in the current episode, that's the dark blue line, to tech investment during the internet episode of the mid-1990s. And what's notable is that investment as a share of GDP, if anything in this cycle, looks to be running ahead of where we were in the internet boom. And in addition, we're well above the levels that in the internet boom were associated with an acceleration of productivity growth. So all of this is very suggestive, and as I've said, to me, reinforces the idea that we're not seeing the productivity, but we're approaching sufficient levels of adoption very quickly, and it's likely to come in coming years. Now, let me conclude with a cautionary note, just to kind of get that out there. Let's skip the next slide. And then one more. Yeah, so this just highlights some speed bumps and a bit of the ongoing debate as to what might slow it down. One, I think there's a big question about where the demand is going to come from. This is going to be a massive expansion of supply. But where does the corresponding demand come from? Now, if we get as much employment as Rebecca's suggested, then workers are going to be fine and they'll provide it. But if that happens unevenly, suppose jobs are created before jobs, or jobs are destroyed before jobs are created, you could go through periods where you have meaningful demand shortfalls. And of course, that means fiscal policy and monetary policy should step in, but fiscal policy is constrained by high debt levels, and monetary policy we've seen can only go so far because of the realities of the zero lower bound. So this question about demand is a big one. Rebecca's already talked about the prospects for employment. Legal and regulatory environments could continue to be a problem. Deep fakes, ensuring reliability, worker acceptance and adoption. And I would say as a corollary there, public acceptance and adoption. I think that if AI went out to a vote of the public, people would probably vote it down. Finally, a lot of geopolitical, national security kinds of issues where, particularly in Europe, there's this concept of AI sovereignty that's floating around, that if every country has to produce their whole stack, AI is going to get stagnated in a lot of different countries. A lot of other angles on that, but let me stop there, Fabio.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you to Rebecca. Those were really great presentation. I'm going to throw you a few questions. I'm going to start maybe one for Rebecca on labor market. The Economist has a cover over the past weekend that was titled "Prepare for the AI Jobs Apocalypse." And there was a long list of statistics that were kind of gloomy, like 7 out of 10 people in the US think AI is going to make it harder to find job. 30% fear that they're going to lose their job, they will be replaced. Now, historically, mass layoff seems to be not the norm in terms of technology innovation, as you mentioned. I wanted to ask you, how much do you think history is a good guide here, given the AI, it's kind of unique in terms of speed of adoption potentially, or speed of technological improvement, breadth, and a bunch of other factors?
I mean, I would say I want to caveat that like most of my data and I think most of the economic literature forecasts are for the next like 3-5 years. Like no one quite knows what AI is going to be able to do in 10 years and how that. It's sort of just very hard to think about many different scenarios there. I think many people are concerned about AI, just the existence of it, and people, particularly who are not using it at work, might have this feeling that, oh, I'm not using it, and that's like a bad signal, which means I'm falling behind or something. I was, comforted by these statistics where they actually surveyed, 6,000 large corporations is not a small number of firms. And there was, pretty consistent answers from C-suite, which is the ones, who would probably know at a high level what's going on in their firms, that they're not expecting mass layoffs in the short run. You can tell lots of stories about even employment growth. We don't quite know how every force is going to play out. What seems clear is that the work we currently do can be done more easily. AI is going to make us all more productive. And the question is, how do we re-optimize around that? So on the one hand, it could make some types of work that required use of lower cost labor outside of the US, for example. One of the reasons we had large manufacturing decline in the US wasn't necessarily a huge pure technology change. It was because it became cheaper to manufacture stuff elsewhere. So employment growth could grow in the US if we can automate jobs that used to require more outsourcing, and the residual tasks that are not AI done can be done better and more at a higher productivity level in the US. So there's complicated predictions about global employment, but it's not at all obvious where the US stacks up in all of this. I think it's hard to forecast for any given job exactly what its employment growth is going to be. But so far, most jobs, a piece of the job is getting automated. I've talked to even the most extreme cases. Like I think one of the classic predictions was like radiologists are going to be completely out of business. And right now, that's just not true. The AI can augment radiologists, but there are times when the AI gets it wrong, and the actual person radiologist can see things that the AI cannot. So we're not really seeing full automation in anything yet.
Fabio, can I comment on
Yeah,
this
of course.
briefly? I spent a lot of time thinking about where is the economy today and what do the data mean. I would characterize at the moment, AI looks to me to be a modest headwind for labor demand. And the channels that seem to me to be in play, and again, I'd underscore, there's a lot of factors that are weighing on labor demand at the moment, and this is just one of them. But I don't think CEOs are saying AI can do the job better than people can at the moment. But the CEOs are very plugged in to the potential for AI. And they say, well, at the moment, no, but maybe over the course of 2 years or 3 years, AI can do that job better than the person can. And does it make sense to go through all the costs and the challenge of filling the slot, training the worker, only in the near future to have to turn around and lay them off? And I think that that's making them a little bit more cautious in terms of listing jobs and seeking new workers. And then as further incentive, when they do that and they're a little bit more hesitant, and especially if they attribute it to AI, the equity markets reward them because investors are looking for these productivity and profitability gains. And then finally, there's also kind of a game that's being played, I think, by CEOs versus their workers, is they're sitting there saying, how do I incentivize my workers to adopt AI as rapidly as possible? And one way I think CEOs are doing it is by running staffing levels a little bit lean. And for that reason, then workers have no choice. They've got to adopt AI just to survive. And I have to say several of those effects are things that I see in my daily life, so to speak.
What do you, both of you, think like it's slowing adoption or constraining adoption? There's a bunch of hypotheses being thrown around, right? One is like the least positive is like a lot of these firms, they need to check a box. Every time you have earnings call, they'll ask you 3,000 questions on AI and you need to say yes. But there's no really business plan behind how to incorporate into the workflow. Another one is that there's constraints on talent. So there is a supply constraints in terms of availability of talent. So another one that says the constraints on compute is starting to be very expensive and the energy is costly, or the historical lesson of the electricity took a long time before it started actually producing productivity inside the firms. They had to completely reshuffle the way it was designed, or any other of those. Those are just few ideas.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in. I think the adoption of AI is occurring very, very rapidly. And certainly relative to any other technologies that we've seen, this is going really fast. And that doesn't mean there aren't constraints, but I think that that's, to me, is more of the headline of what we're seeing. And then the point that I'd make specifically in response to your question is last summer, there was some really interesting work that was done by MIT where they surveyed wide sets of workers. And what they found is that folks were using AI a lot more in their personal lives than they were in their work lives. And at home, they had access to these really powerful and flexible general purpose kinds of AI tools. And what the firms were adopting was more kind of task-specific, sector-specific kinds of applications, or where there were a whole array of other firewalls and constraints and regulatory concerns that were in play, and it just wasn't as useful and adaptable. So I think that a big part of accelerating adoption for firms is finding ways around some of the constraints that they currently face and getting more flexible, more dynamic kinds of tools into people's hands. And frankly, we're already seeing the model of how that might work. So there's a lot of different angles. I think another quick angle is that people kind of feel like they're training their replacements when they start using AI. Use AI too much, they're going to say goodbye. And it's a little scary.
I think also AI is changing still very fast. So like the rollout of access to agents, and Claude Code type stuff that was maybe only like 6 months ago. So that's just a large shift that I don't think has been really picked up in the data yet. Yeah. On top of that, I think some of the slower uptake definitely has to do with the regulatory hurdles, and you have to make sure that access to internal firm data doesn't get shared into the model. So there's more work to make sure you have a version of the software that keeps all of the internal firm data safe. And that was a slower rollout than the general use. Everybody can just go on chatgpt.com and start typing whatever they feel like sharing. I had one more point. And I guess on top of that, we haven't really, I lost my last point there.
So the point was that you were on a cost signal.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, I think we're all still learning how to use AI. Like in my job, I've adopted it a ton, and I feel like every day or every week I find new ways to make what I do better and improve how I was doing things with AI, doing it better with AI. So I feel less worried about using it. I mean, not necessarily to train my replacement, but like if I get particularly good at AI and I'm working at a private sector firm, I'm particularly valuable if I'm better at it than other people. And it's my experience is it's not super plug and chug. There's a lot of ways as a human, to use it better than other humans.
Can I go back to the productivity charts, Nathan, you had? I have 2 questions for you. One, I need to ask, you have the charts of investment into AI and you compare it to the internet boom.
Yeah.
That boom didn't end up well for financial markets. And so if you look at the Well, you kind of called me there. You showed me the chart.
No, this is great. This is great.
If you think about different estimates, right, between $4 and $5 trillion of investment over the next 4 years, say, that would require a massive amount of revenues to generate the expected return that financial markets and investors seem to expect. So the obvious question is like, do you see it as a tech-driven bubble there? And I think the timing of how that productivity is going to materialize matter. I think investors have a such shorter expectation of productivity, while that might take much longer, as you guys have mentioned. The second one, how the productivity is going to accrue and to whom, I think matters as well, right? You can think of two different possible models, like one where all the gains attains to a few oligopolies, so to capital, if you want, and one where competition and policy in place actually incentivize competition, and so price go down, and that accrues more to the consumer side. So where do you think that it's headed?
Fabio, if I had 20 minutes for the original presentation, I would have got to your first question, and if I had 25, I would have got to your second. So these are important issues, and I'll try to answer each one of them in more briefly than 5 minutes apiece here. But I'm often asked, is AI a transformative technology, or is it a bubble? And my answer is, I think once everything is said and done, it's likely to have some elements of both. And as I say that, I am very much drawing on the experience of the internet boom and the integration of that technology into the economy. Was that the real deal? Absolutely. But did it bring bubbles and mispricings and some failures and resource misallocations along the way? It absolutely did. And I would be shocked if every dollar that's being invested in AI ends up paying a significant return. It's a debate as to how many ultimate winners there are going to be at the end of the day here. But I think it almost goes without saying that there will be some losers. And along the way, are we likely to see AI mispriced? I would be surprised if we don't. If you push me into, against the wall and ask you to give me my assessment, I don't think we're in a bubble now. But could we get there? Will we get there over the next, couple of years? I'd be surprised if we didn't see, at least in some parts of the market, that kind of behavior. A lot of other angles, like where does the financing come from? I think it is good that the credit markets are kicking the tires on AI hard. And credit investors are different than equity investors, so we're seeing some additional governance manifests itself. And then on the winners...
Can I interrupt you for just quickly? Yes. Once you mentioned credit versus equity, but isn't equity the best way to fund this? There's a lot of risk, right, embedded in this. Why is credit the best way to fund this?
Well, whatever's best. The reality is that it's so big that it is going to require credit funding. So it's a reality, even if we think, well, maybe equity is better. But what I like about bringing in the credit investors is if you think about the distribution returns of an equity investor, it's skewed to the upside. If it's a bad investment, you lose your investment, but if it's a successful one, you can make many times over your original investment. And that tends to skew the equity investor, in my view, toward kind of optimistic outcomes. If you're a credit investor, your distribution returns is skewed heavily to the downside, where if it goes well, you get repaid. If it goes poorly, you lose everything. And I think that means the credit investors tend to be more cautious and more sober, and they're kicking the tires on this. So I really see, there's risk here, but I see the credit investors as recognizing those risks and exerting important governance on AI that we wouldn't have if it was only credit investors, or only equity investors. That's something we can talk about offline. And then on who wins and loses, I strongly believe that the largest gains are ultimately going to accrue to the adopters of AI. That's where the biggest profits, the biggest productivity gains are going to be enjoyed. And the analogy I draw is it's like the coming of the railroads. Did the railroad barons make gobs of money? Absolutely. But even bigger gains were made by geographies that were transformed, by industries were transformed, by the reduction in transportation costs. And just one final point, with the internet, you can see how, yeah, the tech firms over the last 20 years have been very profitable. But a lot of other sectors have enjoyed those profits as well. It hasn't been like only tech has enjoyed the profits of tech, that you see it throughout the economy.
Rebecca, I don't know if you want to jump in.
I don't have too much to add on that. I do think that I'm excited for some of the downstream payouts to not necessarily, like the firms that adopted and find, I don't even know the right way to say is adopt. The things that we used to do, there may be new firms to find ways to do those things using AI that are much cheaper than how we used to create them. And I think it's going to create some kind of democratization on some margin of access to knowledge. I think some things that are particularly exciting is thinking about, they've already shown that AI as a tutor in school is an amazing resource to help kids learn how to read, write, and do math in a way that's really cheap. And you don't want to just learn from a computer, but relative to only having a teacher with many kids competing for attention, adding access to an AI tutor is making our kids learn more, and they've been having a hard time with test scores. So I think there's going to be lots of exciting sort of downstream consumer surplus payouts of just getting access to knowledge in a way that wasn't as ubiquitous. I think there's concerns about, things like deep fakes and political economy implications, but there are some exciting ones too that could help the next generation learn and have more equal access to opportunity.
Nathan, a question on monetary policy. The Fed has a dual mandate, right? So how this is going to play out both in the labor market in terms of unemployment and what the actual national rate of unemployment will be in this new world, and in terms of inflation. There's a temporal trade-off here between, you hinted at short-term inflationary pressure and potential medium to long-term disinflationary pressure. So how should the central bank think in terms of the dual mandate and how they played out over time as well?
Yeah, so for now, I think it's pretty straightforward for the Federal Reserve. I think they can frame and model what we're seeing from AI largely as a conventional demand shock, where it's a shock to the demand for investment goods. And think about the growth/employment implications of that versus the inflationary components. Now, at the moment, I think the growth components are far more significant than the inflation components. And I showed the upsurge in capital good import prices, where it's kind of suggestive that maybe we're starting to see something rather than that's notable. So I think in the near term, it's a demand shock. And as I was saying, Kevin Warsh is trying to argue it's a supply shock. No, now it's a demand shock. But as the adoption proceeds and we start moving into the world of higher productivity, I think that's when they'll enjoy a positive productivity shock. And the best analog is the Fed in the late 90s, where Greenspan looked at a lot of conventional indicators, and a lot of those conventional indicators, including Fed staff in research and statistics, the domestic unit there that was advising him, were telling him, you've got to hike rates. And Greenspan says, well, no, this thing seems a little different. I'm not sure we're going to get the inflationary pressures associated with the growth and employment that we're seeing. I don't think we need to do it. It turns out he was right. It was a positive supply shock. It will be a world where maybe the Fed won't need to be as aggressive as what you would think if you're only looking at growth. Now, the key question here is what's happening to employment. And, I'm inclined to agree with Rebecca based on history, as well as the argument she made that there is likely to be a significant creation of new employment. But where it could get tricky for the Fed would be if the economy is growing rapidly on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's destroying jobs.
I think one last question for
how you
Rebecca, and
balance
then
that.
I'll stop, Bill. One risk that seems to be underappreciated to me is the political economy, the public backlash on some of this, right? Whether this is about the data center, I live in Northern Virginia, it's a very sensitive topic about energy cost and the visual of having this huge data center, but also on the education side. What do you think the role of public policy should be here at this point? Otherwise, we risk losing the public on this.
I mean, there are many margins to think about there. I think with like data center entry, there's some new research coming out that at least, even though people, there's a growing pattern of things that many think are in the global or national social good have getting like locally placed in more rural areas of the country. And then there's potentially a trade-off of the national good for the local loss. I think a more classic example of this is like wind farms. There's been huge fights about blocking wind farms to come into areas, and those make energy prices lower for everyone, but most people don't have to look at the wind farms and live right next door to them. However, the analysis on data centers has been it doesn't look quite as bad for the local economy. Like when you look at data center entry, you see employment growth, you see wages going up, you often see house prices going up. It's debatable about whether energy prices go up. Most of the analysis have actually found a zero effect on energy prices. They tend to enter places where they're, growing demand for energy for other reasons, as opposed to like the data centers themselves pushing up energy prices. So I think there's a lot of.
This is the point, though, right? Yet you risk losing the PR battle. Like I live in Northern Virginia. It's not rural. And there is a huge pushback despite the benefits, the taxes, and a bunch of stuff. And we have seen in recent elections where it's been really tough if you are labeled as pro data center. Hasn't been great.
Yeah, Northern Virginia is the most dense in the whole, probably maybe, I don't know about the world, definitely in the US.
Yeah.
So the marginal data center in Virginia, is that the optimal place for it? I don't know. But most data centers are not. And even though the density is high there, the average data center is still not there. And I'm sort of surprised that many, mostly rural or sort of exurbs types places are so against it, despite the fact that it does bring jobs to rural areas, which have been having a huge decline for the past 3 decades of migration away from rural areas. There are no jobs. The average person there is a much older individual who's unemployed or retired. Like if anything's going to bring jobs back to rural areas, this is one of the biggest.
Bill, back to you.
Yes, well, Rebecca, Nathan, and Fabio, thank you so much. Very, very interesting and perfect timing. We'll leave it there. And hopefully we'll have you back again and we'll revisit all this down the road. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. This is great.
Thank you.